1,000 years ahead of its time, ancient Rome was a marvel of human culture and ingenuity. Today we're taking a trip back in time to bring you 15 amazing facts about ancient Rome. Number 15. The antics of Emperor Gaius Caligula. The Roman Emperor Gaius Caligula did some questionable things, including making his horse a senator, committing incest with his sisters, feeding prisoners to wild animals, and having conversations with the moon. Think that's where it ends? Wrong. Here are some other tidbits about the mad emperor of Rome. Caligula absolutely loved gold. He allegedly liked to spread gold coins all over the ground and walk on them with his bare feet. Some stories even say he pulled a Scrooge McDuck and waded in them like water. The emperor was very fond of jewels and golden decorations, putting them over his clothes and in the walls of his palace. Another wonderful habit Caligula used to enjoy was drinking natural pearls, dissolved in vinegar. He served loaves and meats of gold during his banquets, leaving the visitors amazed and stating that one should either be a frugal or an emperor. While Caligula was still alive, he erected a temple dedicated to himself and placed a life-size golden statue in his own image inside. Each day he had the statue dressed in whatever he was wearing, and Rome's wealthiest citizens would make offerings to the emperor there. Gifts included flamingos, peacocks, and other exotic animals that the Romans greatly admired. Number 14. Turning Il Colosseo into the Bubble Bowl. In 86 AD, the Coliseum was filled with water to stage a full naval battle. Cassius Dio, a Roman writer, stated that Titus suddenly filled this same theater with water and brought in horses and bulls and some other domesticated animals that had been taught to behave in the liquid element, just as on land. He also brought in people on ships who engaged in sea fighting there, impersonating the Corcyraeans and Corinthians. The first Naumachia on record in 46 BC was in honor of Julius Caesar's quadruple triumph, which ended wars in Gaul, Egypt, against Pharnaces of Pontus, and against King Juba of Numidia. For Caesar's Naumachia, ships representing the Tyrian and Egyptian fleets were set afloat in a basin constructed near the river Tiber. The boats were staffed with 4,000 oarsmen and 2,000 fighting men. It's unclear of how much the ensuing face-off was pre-orchestrated, how much was theatrical, and how much was simply bloody mayhem. But whatever the case, the scale and novelty of the spectacle drew thousands of spectators who crowded and even camped along the streets to catch a glimpse. In the chaotic frenzy, spectators even ended up trampled to death in their eagerness to see boats clash and blood spilled. Number 13. An untested way to build up immunity. Emperors poison themselves a little bit every day. From the end of the 1st century AD, Roman emperors had adopted the daily habit of taking a small amount of every known poison in an attempt to gain an immunity, a practice called Mithridatism. Although effective against some types of poisons, it doesn't work against all of them, and depending on the toxin, the practice can lead to the lethal accumulation of a poison in the body. It was also during this time that a legend sprung up about a special mixture of herbs and other ingredients to create an antidote to any poison. This antidote was later known as a Mithridate, after the name of its inventor. When the Roman emperor waged war with his tribe, preferring death to being shown off as a captured king in a Roman parade, he decided to kill himself. Unfortunately, he must have been overtired, because the only method he could think of was poison. He drank a rather large dose, nearly everything he had on hand, and completely failed to die. Turns out it's much easier just to label things poison and tell people not to eat them. Number 12. Veggie-powered warriors. Roman gladiators had a diet that was mostly vegetarian, according to an analysis of bones from a cemetery where the arena fighters were buried. The study has been carried out by academics from the Medical University of Vienna in Austria and the University of Bern in Switzerland. They found the gladiator diet was grain-based and mostly meat-free. The examination of gladiator bones also found evidence that they drank a drink made from plant ashes. This ash drink was a form of health-boosting tonic to help gladiators recover after fighting and training. The bone analysis was based on excavations of the graves of 22 gladiators from about 1,800 years ago in the Roman town of Ephesus, now in Turkey. The bones revealed that the typical food eaten by gladiators was wheat, barley, and beans, and this echoed the contemporary term for gladiators as barley men. There was little sign of meat or dairy products in the diet of almost all of the professional fighters who performed in front of Roman audiences, but there were bones from 2 people that seemed to have a different pattern, revealing a diet much higher in animal protein and lower in beans and pulses. This could show they were gladiators originally from other parts of the Roman Empire who had a very different type of diet. Number 11. Ancient Viagra. The glistening grime from the rippling pecs of ruthless warriors was a prime aphrodisiac in ancient Rome. They were Rome's rock stars, the Mick Jaggers of the ancient world. After a ruthless battle against their opponent, a long curved piece of metal, much like a blunt sickle, called a strigil, squeegeed the gladiator's sweat, which was then bottled and sold to fans in the audience. If it wasn't used as an aphrodisiac, it was used for medicinal purposes that supposedly helped with ailments such as epilepsy. Regardless of the effects, these people were still imbibing perspiration. The more successful and famous a gladiator, the more potent an aphrodisiac his blood or sweat were believed to be. It could be drunk pure, but more often was mixed with wine and ingested that way. The use of gladiator blood was not limited to cosmetics and aphrodisiacs. It was also believed to have healing properties, particularly in treating epilepsy. Also at that time, drinking the blood of a versatile warrior such as a gladiator was believed to help with impotence and infertility. Number 10. Urine currency. In ancient Rome, pee was such big business that the government had special taxes in place just for urine sales. There were people who made their living from just collecting urine. Some would gather it at public urinals. Others went door to door with a big vat and asked people to fill it up. The way they used it are the last ones you'd expect. For example, they'd clean their clothes in pee. Workers would fill a tub full of clothing in pee, and then one poor soul would be sent in to stomp all over the clothing to wash it out. This is nothing compared to how they cleaned their teeth. In some areas, people used urine as a mouthwash, which they claim kept their teeth shining white. In fact, there's a Roman poem that survives today in which a poet mocks his clean-toothed enemy by saying, "The fact that your teeth are so polished just shows you're the more full of piss." Number 9. Body fluid pheromones. In Roman times, soap was hard to come by, so athletes cleaned themselves by covering their bodies in an oil and scraping the dead skin cells off with a tool called a strigil. Usually, the dead skin cells were just discarded, but not if you were a gladiator. The sweat and skin scrapings were put into a bottle and sold to women as an aphrodisiac. Often, this was worked into a facial cream. Women would rub cream all over their faces, hoping the dead skin cells of a gladiator would make them irresistible to men. We're constantly adding more people to the Top 5's production team to bring you all the best content. Be sure to subscribe with notifications on and hit the like button. Number 8. Advanced irrigation. Aqueducts became one of the key features of Rome. The city alone had over 480 miles of aqueducts, about 29 of which were above ground, and brought in 300 million gallons of water per day. When Rome became an empire and spread across Europe, the Romans introduced aqueducts into their new colonies. Roman aqueduct systems were built over a period of about 500 years, from 312 BC to 226 AD. Both public and private funds paid for the construction. High-ranking rulers often had them built. The Roman emperors Augustus, Caligula, and Trajan all ordered aqueducts built. The most recognizable feature of Roman aqueducts may be the bridges constructed using rounded stone arches. Some of these can still be seen today traversing European valleys. Number 7. Inventors of late-stage capitalism. The ancient Romans were the first to invent and use supermarkets. There were already all kinds of shops in Rome selling a variety of goods, but a complex of buildings was constructed from 107 to 110 AD during the reign of Trajan. A fine example of decorative architecture in Imperial Rome, the complex housed a whole market, along with a residential apartment block and small shops at the front. At the peak of its popularity, Trajan's market contained more than 150 shops. The primary products sold at the market came from all across the Roman Empire. The most popular were food items such as fruits, vegetables, fish, wine, oil, and various spices. Since this structure was built using Roman engineering techniques and a whole lot of ancient Roman concrete, it still stands to this day as a testament to the durability of ancient Roman architecture. Number 6. Gladiators weren't always as esteemed as you'd think. In Roman society, gladiators had very little standing. Not all the gladiators were slaves or prisoners, just most of them, especially when the gladiatorial tradition began. But the free men who sold themselves into gladiatorial combat were also in the lower social strata. Gladiators were on the same level as other men and women who sold their services, namely actors and those in the sex industry, putting them in a unique position. Gladiators were considered brave, achieved fame for their victories, and were lusted after by women. while simultaneously shunted off to the outskirts of propriety. Crowds admired gladiators for facing their mortality, but at the most basic level, gladiators were regarded by polite Roman society as little more than laborers, paid and revered for their willingness to risk their lives. Number 5. Romans were the first invaders of Britain. Up until about 55 BC, Britain was an almost mythical land, and most normal people weren't even sure it actually existed. So, with great ambitions, none other than future dictator in perpetuity Julius Caesar decided to invade Britain and gain himself some gold and glory whilst he was at it. Julius Caesar invaded Britain in 55 and 54 BC as part of his Gallic Wars. According to Caesar, the Britons had been overrun or culturally assimilated by other Celtic tribes during the British Iron Age and had been aiding Caesar's enemies. While Caesar's first invasion of Britain was a disastrous military failure, and it gained him no riches, it gained him all the glory he needed, as he had not only proved Britain did exist, but also had invaded it. Despite this, it would be nearly 100 years until Britain was actually conquered and became part of the Roman Empire in 43 AD. Once conquered, Romans set about leaving their mark on the place. In the 350 years of Roman occupation of Britain, some 10,000 miles of road were constructed using clay, chalk, and gravel. The routes drawn were so usefully unbendy, they're still in operation as British motorways. But while popular myths suggest they just drew a straight line across the landscape and made the road follow it, the truth is they were smart enough to aim for the high ground, to increase drainage and reduce ambushes, and work their way around large obstacles, particularly mountains and rivers, while maintaining straight sections to be as efficient as possible. Number 4. The scale of the Roman Empire at its peak is truly shocking. In 117 AD, the Roman Empire was at its peak, covering a huge surface area of over 5 million square miles. Alaska, the biggest American state, has a surface area of just over 1.7 million square miles, meaning that you could easily fit 3 Alaskas with room for some more into the surface area of the Roman Empire. Estimates put the population of the empire at a max of 90 million people, which would have been 20% of the Earth's population at that time. However, keeping law and order in an empire so vast is almost impossible. The Romans proved that nothing is too big to fail. This is something that the Roman Empire learned the hard way. As their empire grew and ballooned, their ruling institutions became more and more ineffective, leaving them open to attack and helping to contribute to the decision to split the empire in 285 AD. This contributed heavily to the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Number 3. The Romans liked having exotic pets. The most common household pets in Rome weren't the run-of-the-mill dog and cats like we have today. Instead, ferrets, birds, and monkeys were the most favored pets in Rome, with ferrets acting as a pest control measure against rats and mice. Capturing and transporting live animals from distant lands was a lucrative cottage industry in the Roman provinces. Several ancient texts describe the methods used by the suppliers of wild beasts. After identifying bear dens with the help of dogs, hunters would drive the animals out with a cacophony of trumpets and cymbals, not unlike the National Park Service recommendation to make loud noises if you encounter a bear in the wild. Once the bear was out in the open and disoriented, the hunters would chase it into a hidden net they previously set up. This would be a dangerous moment, for at that moment, bears greatly rage with jaws and terrible paws. The strongest members of the hunting team would spring into action to restrain the bear by tying its limbs to wooden planks. At this point, the bear safely handicapped and presumably tired out, it could be loaded into a cage of oak and pine for transport. Number 2. Gladiator fights weren't nearly as popular as chariot races. Circus Maximus, where 250,000 Romans would gather to watch chariot racing, was by far the biggest spectacle in ancient Rome. Circus Maximus was more than twice as large as the biggest soccer stadium in the world today, Urngrado Mayday Stadium in Pyongyang, North Korea. Perhaps one of the reasons why chariot races were attended in such large numbers is because it was one of the few sports where women were allowed to join the audience as spectators, guessing that letting the other half of the population participate is a pretty easy way to double your ticket sales. Although chariot racing was less bluntly violent than gladiatorial combat, it was still incredibly dangerous for both horses and riders. The easiest way to get rid of an opponent was, of course, to drive them into the median, creating a spectacular accident. As riders tied the reins around their waists, when anything at all went wrong, they would be dragged along by the horses until they could free themselves. That is, if they could free themselves. Number 1. Communal washing accessories. Ancient Romans used a sponge on a stick called a spongia to clean themselves after pooping. Public facilities had a long marble bench with holes on top for the obvious thing, and holes at the front to hold the sponge sticks. There were no doors or dividing walls. You sat right next to your friend and did what you had to do. Once you had done your business, you would rinse the spongia in the channel of running water at your feet, and without standing up or revealing anything, push the spongia through the hole at the front to give your bottom a solid wipe. Rinse off the spongia and leave it in a basin for the next person to use. Gross. Watch our binge-watching playlist if you'd like to watch all of our most popular top 15 videos. Grab a drink, grab a snack, and get ready to binge.